worst evil almost always comes from darkness. Quietly, discreetly, and suddenly, he appears like a ghost. He strikes and disappears in the same abyss from which he emerged. So did Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez, because night promotes mystery, conquest of fear, but also anonymity. It's easier to hide in it and stay unnoticed. Even greater tension can be created when a story about a demon that leads a murderer and orders him to shed blood comes to the evil one ruled by himself. Beelzebub, Behemoth, Belial, Lucifer. These characters often move through the imagination of murderers, who with their presence and pressure justify their crimes. But it's not demons that kill, but humans. One of them in the 1970s decided to terrorize the streets of New York, bringing society to the absolute psychic limit. Today I have a story for you about fear, suffering, dark fantasies, and questions that no one has answered yet. It's a story about the son of Sam. It was July 1976. The streets of New York never fell asleep. The social life was filled with fun, sex, and carelessness. Young people did not perceive the dangers that came from different sides, their everyday lives, and mutual relationships. Camel streets quickly turned into lovers' alleys, and nightclubs were pushed by guests to the shores. The city was vibrant, so the shock was even greater when it had to be silent at once. On July 29th, about 1 p.m., 18-year-old Donna Laurie and her 19-year-old friend Jody Valentine left a discotheque in New Rochelle, New York. They got into the car and went ahead. They got to the Bronx, where Laurie was about to land. Then she saw a man running fast. Surprised by his sudden appearance, she only replied, "What is it?" But at this point, a stranger was already by her side, and Valentine pulled a gun out of the paper bag and targeted both women. Donna died immediately. Jody was hurt. As soon as the assailant appeared, he disappeared as quickly, leaving behind a shot woman. Jody later testified that it was a medium-sized young man with black, curly hair. According to her, he weighed about 90 kilograms. He had a clear carnation. This fairly detailed description came to the police, who were convinced that it was an accidental crime, as many in New York. She didn't think it was just the beginning of a real hell that would change the people of the city forever. With another attack, the killer waited until autumn. On October 23rd, 20-year-old Carl DeNaro and 18-year-old Rosemary Keenan met in Queens, New York. They were sitting in a man's parked car and talking quietly. The discussion was interrupted by a noise and the sound of broken glass. The fittings in the car literally broke. The couple were in shock. It wasn't until Carl realized that his head was bleeding. Someone shot them. The bullets passed Rosemary, who suffered superficial injuries from broken glass, but Carl needed urgent help. The bullet damaged his skull, a fragment of which had to be replaced with a metal plate. The couple had no idea who was targeting them. Neither Carl nor Rosemary saw the attacker. His identity therefore remained a mystery. Already at this stage, some similarities could be seen between the cases of Laurie and Valentina, and DeNaro and Keenan. The victims were young people. All four were in cars at the time of the attack. They were shot and, importantly, in none of these cases the motive could be determined. It has been determined that the attacker is using a caliber .44 weapon. On November 27th, the killer revealed himself again. Donna DeMasi, 16, and Joanna Domino, 18, returned home shortly after midnight. They were talking on the porch of the house when a young man dressed in a military suit approached them and began to ask for a way. After a moment from a shy stranger, he turned into a monster, who quickly reached for a gun and shot both girls. The noise was heard by the neighbor who ran out of the building. Then he saw a blonde walking next to him, holding a gun in his left hand. DeMasi was shot in the neck, but fortunately, the wound was not fatal. Domino was hospitalized in severe condition. She was shot in the back, which ended in paralysis for her. Based on the testimony of the witnesses and the victims themselves, a memorial portrait was drawn up. He represented a man with straight, light hair on his side. This was very different from the versions presented by previous victims. They talked about a brunette with curly hair. The situation was thus becoming more and more mysterious. Kristen Front, 26, and her fiancé, John Deal, 30, were sitting in a car on January 30th, 77. They saw the movie Rocky a moment earlier. The peaceful encounter turned into a nightmare when 3 shots suddenly broke through the vehicle. Bill was slightly wounded, but Kristen was shot twice and died in the hospital a few hours later. It was only after this crime that the police for the first time officially admitted that all 3 cases could be linked and that they were probably the same perpetrator. The media quickly called him the Caliber 40 for killer. It was also noted that the victims were mostly young women with long, dark hair. Panic broke out in New York. Hairdressers have become besieged. The women cut off their long hair and changed their color. There have also been drawings of the perpetrator in the media. Everyone was different. At that point, the police did not rule out the possibility that there might even be a few assailants. 5 weeks later, on March 8th, Virginia was coming home in the evening. She was 19. The road was crossed by an armed man. Seeing the revolver, the girl picked up the books, which she held in her hands, and tried to hide from the bullets. Unfortunately, these passed the textbooks and were stuck in the body of the teenager. She died on the spot. The newspapers overpowered each other in assumptions and theories about the killer's identity. It was stressed that all of its aggression is directed at young women. The atmosphere in New York was becoming more and more tense. There was paralyzing fear in the streets. Parents forbade their children to leave the house after dark. The alleys of the lovers began to shine empty. People were trembling for their lives and wondering which side the armed killer could attack this time. The answer came on the 17th of April. At about 3 o'clock in the night, the 20-year-old Alexander and the 18-year-old Valentina were sitting in a car on the road to the Bronx. They were very unlucky because there was a murderer in the area. For shots broke through the silence of the night. Valentina died on the spot, and Alexander a few hours later. Here, too, the same weapon was used as in the previous attacks, but this murder was different from the previous one because it was the first time the killer left a message. It was a handwritten letter addressed to Captain Joseph of the New York Police, Borelli, which read as follows.
Dear Captain Borella, it touched me that you suspected me of hating women. That's not true, but I'm a monster. Son of Sam. I'm a little bitch. When Father Sam gets drunk, he becomes ugly. He's beating his family. Sometimes he binds me to the back of the house. Another time he locks me in the garage. He likes to drink blood. Go and kill, orders Father Sam. There are many buried in our garden, mostly young people, raped and killed. The earth has absorbed their blood, it's just the bones left. Dad locks himself on the roof. I can't get out of there, but I look out the window and look at a world that's passing away. I feel like I'm being thrown out. It's on different waves than anybody else. I'm programmed to kill. To stop me, you have to kill me. Attention cops, shoot as soon as you see me. Shoot to kill. Or get out of my way, because you're going to die. Papa Sam is already old. He needs blood to keep his youth. He had heart attacks too often. Oh, but I suffer, little boy. Above all, I miss my little princess. She's already resting, but I'll see her soon. I am a monster, Beelzebub, behemoth. I love hunting, crossing the streets, hunting for occasions, for delicious meat. Queen's women are the most beautiful of all. Maybe it's because of the water they have there. I love to hunt. It's my whole life. Getting blood for Daddy. Dear Mr. Borella, I don't want to kill ever again, but I have to for your honor.
The whole thing ended with the words, "I'll be back here," and he added, "Your murder is a monster." The Caliber 40 for killer from now on was called the Son of Sam. His letter was extremely disturbing, full of hidden symbolism, incomprehensible references, and some sort of madness that made the crimes he was committing even more frightening. Not only did his son write letters to the police, In the history of mankind, such an action is not exceptional. BTK or Zodiac did it. Each of them wanted attention and publicity. Serial killers are often narcissists who want to be heard at last. They want their crimes to shock the world, paralyze the streets, enslave human minds. Writing letters is asking for attention, for focusing attention only on yourself, for the media. Such news is like a cherry on the cake. They're overcoming the sales of newspapers because everybody wants to read the words of a psychopath. He hopes he'll reveal his motives, let him look into his mind. After Sam's son's letter, a festival of speculation began. Everyone interpreted its content in their own way. The police thought the killer might know Scottish English because he used words that were associated with that accent. Psychiatrists also took the letter for analysis. They believed that the author might be paranoid, convinced that he was possessed by demons. The Daily News published an article directed at the murderer. The headline was yelling, "Give up." The author of this text was Yimmy Breath, and he became the next recipient to whom the envelope with the message was sent by the son of Sam began with words. "Welcome from the New York slopes filled with dog feces, vomiting, stinging, wine, urine, and blood. Tell me, Jim, what are you going to have on July 29th? It was treated as a sign of another shooting. July 29th was the anniversary of the first attack. So it was believed that the son of Sam was again planning a bloody night on the streets of New York. This time under the letter also appeared a symbol unprecedented before. It looked like a combination of several arrow characters, a cross, or an S. Despite the successive crimes of victims and letters, the police had no idea who the assailant might be. She admitted that she was helpless. Sal Lupo and Judith Placido left the disco on June 26th. They sat in a parked car. Just a few moments earlier, they had a hot discussion about the son of Sam. About 3 o'clock in the night, they themselves became his victims. 3 shots were fired at the vehicle. Lupo was injured in Placido's forearm, in the thigh, shoulder, and neck. Despite so many injuries, she survived the attack. The couple did not see the assailant, but the witnesses said they saw a black-haired man who escaped immediately after the shooting. On the first anniversary of the son's activity, the police themselves organized an unprecedented action. Patrols were everywhere. They focused mainly on Queens and the Bronx, but also on Brooklyn, and closed our little streets, alleys for lovers, and surrounding parks. The psychosis also affected the New Yorkers themselves who spent the night at home. Few people dared to go outside. The hours of darkness passed in an atmosphere of expectation. But nothing happened. The killer didn't attack. Maybe he was expecting a storm, and he knew that shooting at night like this could be extremely risky. The officers, for this at least for a moment, breathed with relief. They didn't have to hide the bodies of other young people in their bags, but it was only a moment's peace. 2 days later, the killer brutally recalled himself. On July 31st, young blonde Stassi Moskovic met Robert, a clothes salesman. They were sitting in a car parked under a lighthouse near the city park. It was their first date. Their kiss was interrupted by a man who approached them from the passenger side and fired 4 times. Both victims were injured in the head. Robert survived the attack, but he lost his left eye. Moskovic died in the hospital after a long struggle for her life. Her parents were broken. Later, they repeatedly appeared in the media and talked about their trauma. Stassi's mother admitted that it's very difficult to get back to normal after something like this. At least for me, it's hard to collect scattered pieces of reality. But after this case, there was hope to catch the killer. Cecilia Davis was walking with her dog when she saw a police officer issuing a fine for a badly parked car standing next to the fire hydrant. Shortly after the officer left behind the wiper, a man approached the car. She drew attention to him because, as she said, he was holding some dark object in his hands. She went home and heard gunshots coming from the street. That's when Stassi Moskovic was murdered. Only 4 days later, Davis told the police about her observations. It checked on whose name the mandate was issued at the time. And this is where the name David Berkowitz appeared for the first time. Officers decided to check it out. Berkowitz lived in Yonkers, New York, so the cops called the unit there. The dispatcher who picked up the phone was someone who turned out to know David. She told the investigators a disturbing story. Her father was named Sam and had a dog that Berkowitz shot. The officers were lighted with a red light. It wasn't about the dog itself, it was about the name of Mr. Kara, Sam, yet the murderer whom they sought called himself the son of Sam, so the cops focused all their attention on David. On August 10th, the officers decided to inspect Berkowitz's car. It was parked on Pine Street in Yonkers. There was only one problem. The cops didn't have a court order to search. And yet they took the risk and looked inside. There was a gun in the back seat. Inside was a bag of ammunition, a map of the crime scene, as well as a letter of threats that announced another bloody crime. The investigators felt they had their son alone in their hands. All we had to do was wait for him to get closer to the vehicle. At about 22 o'clock, Berkowitz left the apartment and directed his steps towards the parked car. He was surprised by one of the detectives who came up and asked if it was David Berkowitz. He said, "No, I'm a son of mine. You got me." A wide smile appeared on his face, which did not disappear even when he had to walk surrounded by a crowd of people demanding revenge for the crimes he had committed. The police immediately obtained a search warrant and were able to enter Berkowitz's apartment. They found Satanist inscriptions on the wall, as well as his diaries, which he had been keeping for a long time. A total of 3 records completely recorded with his memories and crimes. As it turns out, he could have had up to 1,400 fires in New York. Berkowitz dreamed of entering a burning building and pulling women and children out of it. In this way, he could become the hero he had dreamed of for years. I have to admit that quite a strange desire, considering that he chose the path of a serial killer. David's neighbors were in shock. They repeated that he was a calm, retreated man who didn't raise any suspicions. He used to say good day and disappear in his apartment. They would never associate him with the son of Sam, who terrorized the whole city and the surrounding area. He used to smile. He didn't say much. He didn't make any trouble either. So how is it possible that someone like that took a gun and killed innocent people? The answer to this question can be found in the story of David Berkowitz, who, before becoming a murderer, was first a lost boy. He was also adopted. David learned very early that he was adopted. He was only a few years old, he said in an interview.
Yes. I remember being in the living room. My parents said they wanted to talk to me seriously. I was sitting nervously. I was about 4 or 5 years old. My dad told me, "You need to know that you've been adopted." I told myself I was okay. I didn't know what that meant. They explained it to me. When you were born, your mother died, and your father couldn't take care of you. I was a little child. I had a lot of questions. Who's my dad? Where's my dad and who was my mom? Part of me repeated my mother died when she gave birth to me. What did I do wrong? I grew up thinking about my God, my mother died because of me. I'm a bad boy. Look at me. I killed my mother. I did something wrong.
David was an extremely difficult child. As he said, he was constantly fueled by energy and destroyed every toy he had received from his parents. He was unable to cope with the emotions that bore him, and they became more intense with each year of life. As a student, he made a lot of trouble. He was engaged in quarrels, and the other disciples bothered him. He repeated that he hated schools and teachers who, in his feelings, wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. Self-destructive thoughts began to appear in him very early. He was avoiding company, hiding in the closet, or escaping through the window without telling his parents. As an adult man, he assured him that he had already heard voices coming to him from all sides. Anger and frustration grew in him, which is why he finally got under the care of a psychologist. He went to therapy every week, every Saturday, but during these conversations, he couldn't find peace. He became more and more fascinated by criminal activities, small thefts, and burns. That's what he started to focus most on. When he was 14, his adopted mother died of breast cancer. It was an extraordinary blow for David. It was his mother who was closest to him. He had a much better relationship with her than he had with his father. After her death, the wall between her husband and son grew even more. Despite Berkowitz's problems, he graduated from high school and joined the army at the age of 17. He was hoping to go to Vietnam, but instead, he was sent to Korea. That's where he learned how to shoot. After returning from the army in 1974, David worked with a family search agency. He wanted to meet his biological father, but life brought him an even more surprising story. For he discovered that his mother was not dead at all. She lived and was very well. He also found out he had a natural sister, Rosalind. He decided to make contact with the women, and here there are some discrepancies in the course of events. In the 1970s, when Berkowitz was captured, and the media were exaggerating the details of his life, it was that the first meeting was disappointing for David. The mother was not a unique, beautiful woman, as he imagined, but an ordinary housewife who stood out in nothing special. Their conversation was also not a passionate one, but David himself admitted a few years later that the meeting looked completely different from what the journalist did. As he convinced him, he and his mother fell into each other's arms. There were a lot of tears, smiles, and honest conversation. The natural sister proved to be extremely warm and engaged in trying to rebuild their relationship. It is difficult now to figure out which version of the mutual relationship was true. David's real name was Richard David Falco, and his mother gave him up for adoption a few days after he was born. His father was not interested in an unmarried child, so he abandoned his partner and his future son. David never regretted being in the Berkowitz family. He repeated that they were the greatest parents you could ever imagine. The only objection he had was to his father's job, in which the man disappeared for 6 days. His upbringing was primarily cared for by his mother. After discovering the truth about himself, even more disturbing thoughts began to emerge in David's head. After a few meetings, he stopped contacting his natural sister. He didn't talk to his biological mother either. He's getting more and more separated from the world, Berkowitz said so.
My life was really crumbling. My personality was falling apart. I began to be controlled by other beings to whom I opened up, but I had a tendency to do so for the rest of my life. Because of the experiences of my childhood, all this trauma, it's opened the door to the demonic wreckage of my life. So every way that the crime happened was a tragedy. I was very grateful that I was finally arrested because I was in such a state of affliction that my life was a real mess. Outside I was able to work and function, but inside I was just in chaos. When I was arrested, the police asked me, "Are you a son alone?" I said yes.
After his arrest, Berkowitz admitted that he belonged to a satanic sect. It was she who had the greatest influence on him and led to the path of killing. The members of the group met in a secluded place where the initiation took place.